This tutorial looks at the risk versus reward properties of gearing. Gearing simply refers to the use of debt, and in other parts of the world it's known as leverage. We'll make use of an example to understand what's the risk that comes with using debt financing and what are the rewards that come with using debt financing. Let's say that an entrepreneur starts a business, and in order to start the business, they need capital of R1,000,000. Now, this R1,000,000 can either be sourced from debt financing, say a 1-year loan at 10% interest, or it can be sourced from people buying into the business. We call that equity financing. Now, let's say in terms of the business's performance, there are two scenarios. In the first scenario, the business makes a profit of 50,000 Rand. In the second scenario, the business makes a profit of 5 million Rand. Now we'll look at what is to happen with the repayments if the financing is totally debt versus if the financing is totally equity. So in the first instance, where the profit is 50,000 Rand, if the business was funded entirely by debt, then the entrepreneur would have a mandatory obligation to pay the principal that he borrowed together with the interest on that principal. So it's R1,000,000 plus 10% of R1,000,000, which is 100,000 Rand. So if the business was funded totally by debt, the entrepreneur would need to pay back 1,100,000, regardless of the amount of profit that they made. That's just the nature of debt. So debt financing is extremely risky because regardless of how much profit you make, you need to pay back the agreed upon loan and interest amounts. If, on the other hand, the business had been financed totally by equity, then the entrepreneur would only need to pay out the profits that the business made. So the entrepreneur would only need to pay out 50,000. So given that there's no mandatory payment when it comes to equity, equity represents a lower risk source of financing. Now let's consider the second scenario. If the business instead makes 5 million Rand, the business, if it was funded totally by debt, would still need to pay whatever was agreed upon in the loan agreement. So the business would still need to pay 1.1 million Rand. The difference between the profit that the business made of 5 million Rand and the debt repayment of 1.1 million Rand is 3.9 million Rand. And this 3.9 million Rand, the entrepreneur gets to keep. So debt financing, whilst risky because you need to pay the 1.1 million Rand regardless of the profit that you make, is also potentially rewarding because the profits made over and above the debt servicing requirements are yours to keep as the entrepreneur. So the reward to you as the entrepreneur is great. However, if the business was funded totally by equity, then if you make 5 million Rand, then there's a possibility that you need to pay to your equity providers 5 million Rand. So with equity, the equity providers get to share in the downside risk. So if you make only 50,000, you then only need to pay them 50,000. So the risk is low. However, they also get to share in the upside potential. So if you make 5 million Rand, then they've got a claim to the 5 million Rand. So the rewards for you as the entrepreneur when you obtain equity financing is lower than if you get debt financing. So the key takeaway here is that with debt, the risk is high because the debt repayment terms are mandatory, but the reward is also high because anything more than what you need to pay your debt providers is yours to keep. Whereas with equity, there's no mandatory payment that you need to make to your equity providers. But if you do then make a lot of profit, they've got a claim to that profit. So the risk is low. However, the reward is also low for you as the entrepreneur when it comes to equity financing.